Our speaker is Mirka Cirovic, independent researcher from Serbia. Today, she presents her talk on the topic, Metaphors of the Madman, Conceptualization of Love in Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream.
Metaphors of the Madman, Conceptualization of Love in Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream, Mirka Cirovic, independent researcher. In today's presentation, I will talk about why we should study Shakespeare from the perspective of cognitive linguistics. I will talk about the tools from the cognitive linguistics toolkit that I will use to read and analyze A Midsummer Night's Dream most effectively. Then I will analyze the selected lines from the play, which are all about love, so that I can identify and discuss the underlying cognitive patterns and mechanisms of thought that account for specific readings of the play. Finally, I will draw some conclusions based on the analysis that I will conduct. So why should we study Shakespeare from the perspective of cognitive linguistics? According to Samuel Johnson, Shakespeare's characters are moved by general passions and principles by which all minds are agitated, making their experiences communicable to all times and places. This means that Shakespeare's plays stimulated their first audiences and they continue to stimulate their audiences today. The reason behind this can be found in Harold Bloom's insight when he said that Shakespeare will go on explaining us in part because he invented us. Shakespeare is the canon. He sets the standards and the limits of literature. While this may be perceived as an instance of idolatry, Harold Bloom was right when he said that Shakespeare defined or at least explained human nature. Now, he seems to have achieved this through a brilliant representation of the abstract, such as emotions, passions, life, death, religious feelings, interpersonal relations, and social constructs, so on. This was very well put by Michael Booth, who wrote Shakespeare and Conceptual Blending, Cognition, Creativity, Criticism, where he said that the most intellectually rewarding experience of reading Shakespeare is understanding the workings of mind in general. A while ago, I saw an interview with Peter Stockwell on YouTube where he said that cognitive linguistics is the toolbox, its theories are tools, and you can choose from the toolkit whatever best accounts for the literary text at hand. In line with this, I have developed a tailor-made cognitive approach to reading and analyzing A Midsummer Night's Dream based on what we know from cognitive linguistics and about human mental processing in general, all the while taking into consideration the play's most prominent themes, of which love is definitely one, and its composition as well. So the proposed cognitive approach involves 3 steps, and it relies on 2 cognitive linguistic theories. In the first step, I will take metaphorical linguistic expressions about love from the play, and I will use these examples to show how the proposed cognitive approach actually works, and I will also use these examples to show the potential benefits of the proposed approach to both fields, cognitive linguistics and literature. In the second step, I will use Lakoff's conceptual metaphor theory to account for the most basic aspects of conceptualization and the most widely shared aspects of readers' comprehension. Here I will heavily draw on Lakoff's insight that conceptual metaphors as building blocks of metaphorical meaning in everyday language are also the building blocks of metaphorical meaning in literature. Now, I can quickly exemplify this by using Love is a Journey conceptual metaphor, which underpins the expression taken from everyday language. They took their separate ways, and it also underpins the expression taken from literature, the course of true love never did run smooth. So this basically means that great poets and writers speak to us because they use the same modes of thought that we all share and possess. In the third step, I will introduce Fauconnier and Turner's blending theory, which will help me observe how transient mental spaces or temporary pockets of meaning are formed as writers and readers grapple with more creative scenarios and novel instances of abstract meaning. While conceptual metaphor theory involves 2 conceptual domains and the mapping process which occurs between their systematic correspondences, blending theory involves 4 mental spaces or inputs. In the proposed approach, the first input is made of conceptual metaphors dynamically interacting with one another in a short stretch of text and space. The second input is what these conceptually integrated metaphors translate into without adding anything new into the second input. The third input is called a generic space. It contains conceptual structures relevant for both of the previous inputs, based on which they can align and blend. And finally, there is the blended space, where material from all the previous inputs selectively combines and projects new meanings. Now, the emergent structure in the blended space accounts for the diverse elements of meaning, such as cultural, historical, political, psychological, social, and philosophical. The emergent structure from the four-space model can also explain the inference phenomenon, the cognitive and aesthetic unity of varied individual inputs, which are all crucial for a full appreciation of literary experience. Now I will show how the proposed cognitive approach actually works by analyzing the lines taken from the play. So these lines are spoken by Aegeus, who comes to Theseus, the Duke of Athens. He complains of his only daughter, Hermia, who insists on marrying Lysander, while her father, Aegeus, has already chosen a husband for her, which is Demetrius. On this occasion, Aegeus tells Lysander, "You had bewitched the bosom of my child," where we see love is magic or love is a spell conceptual metaphor. He also says, "You have stolen the impression of her fantasy. With cunning hast thou filched my daughter's heart." Love is theft and heart is a valuable possession. Conceptual metaphors are noticed here. Then Aegeus conceptualizes gifts and tokens of love as messengers of strong prevailment in unhardened youth, where we see that love is a conquest. And finally, unhardened youth, there is also the metaphor, the mind of a young person is wax. In the end, Aegeus says, "You have turned her obedience, which is due to me, to stubborn harshness," where we see love is transformative power, conceptual metaphor, and daughters are their father's possession. So these conceptual metaphors are not isolated, they do not stand alone, but they become conceptually integrated, forming the first input which participates in the blending process. So these conceptually integrated metaphors translate into the second input as Hermia having no agency whatsoever. Her father decides for her. She is formed either by her father or by her male lover. She is not perceived as a lover either, but as a victim. Lysander's love is perceived as a malignant external force. This external force is disruptive because it challenges legal, paternal, and social authority. Now, the third input is a generic space, where cognitive relations relevant to both of the inputs are stored. So we have relations related to patriarchy, where we understand that daughters are their father's valuable possessions. We have relations included in wooing, where we understand that is the exchange of gifts, tokens, promises, writing of verses and rhymes and love poems. There are relations included in witchcraft, where there are magical incantations aimed at changing somebody's mind, will, emotions. There are relations included in military campaigns, where we know there are military men, there are advances, and there are targets, which may be easy or difficult. When these three inputs undergo a blending process, they project into the fourth space as Aegeus's coherent argument, where we see that Aegeus perceives independent and self-authored love as a disease of the mind, and a diseased mind is seen as a threat to a rational or civilized society, which is why the four lovers relocate and go into the irrational world of fairy woodland. For Aegeus, love is profoundly political. It is less about romance and more about autonomy or the lack of it and order. And finally, panic is felt in Aegeus's words, and this kind of panic emerges when the old order faces a love that it cannot control. Now, as you can see, some aspects of the meaning from the blended space are not available in any of the individual inputs, but these aspects of meaning are dynamically structured in the blended space. This primarily refers to emotions and emotional states that characters find themselves in. Another example from the play that I will analyze, yeah, here it is. So these lines are spoken by Lysander before he and Hermia decide to elope and leave the unaccommodating and the rigid world of Athens. So he says the course of true love never did run smooth. Love is a difficult journey. War, death, or sickness did lay siege to it. Love is a besieged fortification. Love is momentary as a sound, swift as a shadow, short as any dream, brief as the lightning in the cold night. So love is an ephemeral phenomenon, or love is a brief sensory experience. Then the jaws of darkness do devour it up. Love is a vulnerable prey. Again, these metaphors become conceptually integrated, and they translate into the second input as an insight about true love, that for all its power and beauty, it is ultimately positioned as sustenance for the forces of destruction. In the generic space, we have love as being positively valued. We have external forces that represent an active threat or opposition to love, and we have the knowledge that love is susceptible to harm. Now, when these three inputs undergo a blending process, they project into the blended space um, as a kind of a parallelism that adds a layer of existential tragedy to the lines uttered by Lysander. Just like darkness devours light, love's beauty and power become the sustenance for destructive forces. And this basically means that the more genuine the love is, the more perfect fuel for its own annihilation it becomes. The next three examples are taken from Helena's discourse. Now, Helena is in love with Demetrius. Demetrius used to be in love with her, but now he pursues Helena's best friend Hermia, which leaves Helena wretched. And she frequently thinks about how changeable and irrational and intangible love is. So that's why three examples from her discourse. So Helena says, love looks not with the eyes but with the mind, and therefore is winged Cupid painted blind. Nor hath love's mind of any judgment taste, wings and no eyes figure unheedy haste. And therefore is love said to be a child, because in choice he is so oft beguiled. As waggish boys in game themselves forswear, so the boy love is perjured everywhere. So here we have love is a person, conceptual metaphor, where love is personified as Cupid or as a boy. We have seeing is understanding. Love has no eyes, it doesn't see anything, it doesn't understand anything, and it is utterly irrational. Love is a child's game, no rules, just fancy. And the last conceptual metaphor is found at the end of the lines where Helena says, Demetrius hailed down oaths that he was only mine, and when this hail, some heat from Hermia felt, so he dissolved and showers of oaths did melt. So the promises of love are weather elements, precipitation, and hail most specifically. So again, these metaphors become conceptually integrated in the first input, and then they translate into the second input as past thoughts of consistency and as present betrayal. Um, this is Helena's experience of love. It is irrational, immature, and inherently faithless. And also there is the perception that vacillation and indecisiveness are typical of men, because love is personified as a boy and referred to as a he. In the generic space, we have an active force or agent, which is Demetrius and love, seemingly tangible proof of love, which is a love's promise. We have an external catalyst for change, which is the sun's warmth or Hermia, and we have the dissolution of the proof of love, which eventually turns to be intangible. In the blended space, we see that Helena conceptualizes Demetrius's betrayal as an inevitable operation of emotional physics and as something orchestrated by a blind child god. For Helena, Helena also creates a narrative where Demetrius is less a treacherous man and more a conduit of love's universal faithlessness. And she manages to transform a personal insult, a personal injury, into an impersonal phenomenon in which she is both admirable and lamentable. And the blend shows that Helena is a victim of forces as vast as the weather and as arbitrary as a child's game. Second example from her discourse is, you draw me, you hard-hearted adamant, but yet you draw no iron, for my heart is true as steel. Leave you your power to draw, and I shall have no power to follow you. Love is a physical force, attraction is magnetism, emotional character is a physical property, so people can be hard or soft when it comes to their emotional availability, and loyalty is the purity of metal, which is why Helena describes herself, her heart, that describes her heart true as steel. In the first input, these metaphors become conceptually integrated, and then they translate into the second input as Helena lacking control in her feelings for Demetrius. She almost pleads to be released from his power, and she is very loyal and consistent, which makes her even more susceptible to Demetrius's power. In the generic space, we have the power relationship, magnet metal, Demetrius Helena, unidirectional force, magnet Demetrius, properties of the target and the source. The target is true as steel, the source is hard. In the blended space, we see that loyalty necessitates attraction to a lover, even a cruel one. We see that love is based on a fatalistic principle, which means that the victim's virtue powers the mechanism of their suffering. The blend generates a kind of a false solution for Helena because she is asking Demetrius to change a fundamental property of his being so that she could be freed from the fundamental property of hers. And this is the last example that we will analyze. So Helena says, I am your spaniel, and Demetrius, the more you beat me, I will fawn on you. Use me but as your spaniel, spurn me, strike me, neglect me, lose me, only give me leave, unworthy as I am to follow you. Love is servitude, lover is a dog, beloved is a master. These three metaphors become integrated, and then they translate into the second input as Helena demonstrating the extreme lengths of her unrequited love. She begs for a low debased position, and her request is not mutual affection, but the right to be in Demetrius's presence. In the generic space, we have a voluntary hierarchical relationship, master-dog. We have actions related to authority and actions related to servitude. In the blended space, we see that Helena's only desire is to be granted the status of an official inferior. Demetrius's rudeness and his indifference are the only forms of his attention, which is all that Helena seeks, and humiliation becomes her badge of belonging. Finally, the blend resolves the tension of unrequited love by erasing any expectation of mutuality. In the end, I will draw some conclusions based on the analysis I have carried out so far. Of course, the corpus made of metaphorical linguistic expressions about love from A Midsummer Night's Dream could be much more substantial, and the conclusions could be much more comprehensive. But here are the insights after analyzing the few examples that you saw. Metaphors in literature are more complex, original, striking, rich, and novel than metaphors in everyday language, which is why they require more cognitive effort to analyze and interpret. That's why I used conceptual metaphor theory to help me identify the basic mechanisms of thought in individual metaphorical linguistic expressions. And then I used blending theory to help me observe how conceptual metaphors integrate in longer stretches of text across monologues and dialogues. I also use blending theory to help me account for the aspects of meaning that remain hidden in the two-domain model of conceptual metaphor theory. We have already mentioned these aspects of meaning, such as political, historical, social, psychological, philosophical, and so on. Now, thanks to congruent metaphors, Shakespeare presents a concept or an idea in a similar way, and the play gets to convey its general meanings. So, in A Midsummer Night's Dream, we see that love creates hierarchies, giving women debasing positions. Men vacillate while women are constant. Love is irrational, and romantic love is given an advantage over political love. Finally, this kind of analysis enriches literature because it offers more detailed and nuanced meanings of figurative language, and it also enriches cognitive linguistics because it expands its application to more complex and novel instances of figurative language that can only be found in poetic discourse. Here are the references that I used to build this presentation, and finally, thank you for your attention.